to get back to the point, when the president says that our Constitution has withstood all these wars, it absolutely hasn't. And the number one cause of illness, some would say death, to the U.S. Constitution has been wars, both hot and cold. There is no Fourth Amendment anymore. No one should pretend that there is, and that's the war on terror, finishing off something that another Cold War, the war on drugs, probably started. The president talked about bringing the troops home from Iraq and Afghanistan as though we could hold our head up high because we went in there, we did the job, and now people are coming home and the job is finished, when in fact, listen, I want to phrase this the right way, because there are a lot of veterans who listen to this show and a lot of veterans who don't, but it doesn't matter. I mean, those people gave their all in these conflicts, and it's not their fault the way it turns out, just like it's not their fault the way Vietnam turned out. But let's not sugarcoat this, for compassionate reasons. Folks, we are leaving Iraq every bit as bad as we found it. And people don't like to hear that. Folks, 500 people have been killed in sectarian attacks in Iraq this week. We told you years ago. We've been telling you for years. And every time I mention it, soldiers that were recently in Iraq always write me and say, Dan, that's exactly how we feel. We're on the ground there. We'd say blah, blah, blah. But folks, again, you don't have to be a genius. It's there for everyone to see. Iraq is a country much like the former Yugoslavia was, a country made up of peoples that, while they all claim to be proud Iraqis, really don't want to live with each other unless they can control the whole show. And they're not going to. And if you recall the surge, remember when we had the famous surge in Iraq, and we went in there because Iraq was descending into a civil war, and we managed to quell the violence and sort of do a reset so everybody would just calm down for a while. That was the American version of what a Saddam Hussein had to do in that region perpetually. The same thing a Joseph Tito had to do in Yugoslavia. The reason you get these iron-fisted dictators in some of these countries sometimes is because they're the only ones that can keep those countries together. And they do it with a brutality that is appalling, but those countries wouldn't be together without it, because somebody will bomb something, which will create a cycle of violence. You will see it when Sunnis will bomb a Shiite shrine, or Shiites will bomb a Sunni church in retaliation. And once you get this revenge thing going, these people have extremely long memories. All the people in the Middle East do. And they can hearken back to the last time someone did something bad to them, or the time before that, and no one ever has figured out who cast the first stone. But the minute a bunch of people die, it's on again, right? And we're hearkening back to wounds from 20, 30, 50, 200 years ago. It doesn't matter. Keeping Iraq together is probably going to require the same sort of person that we spent years, blood, and treasure throwing out of that country. If that's the case, ladies and gentlemen, why did we do that? And was it valuable? And listen, to the credit of the first President Bush administration, there was a reason that those pragmatists in that administration, when the first Gulf War happened, didn't go into Iraq, because they said it was going to be just like it is. And it was the second Bush administration, with their cowboy mentality and their neoconservatives were going to be welcomed with flowers and all that, who basically went 180 degrees against, and by the way, slamming the elder Bush's advisors when they did, and, who's turning out to be right now. The president also said that, bringing the troops home from Afghanistan and all this and all that. Well, folks, listen, let's remember something. And Gwynne Dyer, who we had on this program, military historian Gwynne Dyer, pointed this out a long time ago. Actually, we had Dyer on the History Show, didn't we, Ben? Dyer pointed out that, when the 9/11 attacks happened and we sent special forces and operations into Afghanistan to start clearing out al-Qaeda-related forces, they did a great job. They did a great job. There was perhaps no reason at all to put boots on the ground in one of the most troubling, nefarious, infamous places to put boots on the ground in the world, but we did anyway. And now we're pulling them out of that area, and we're going to end up almost certainly with exactly what was in that area before we put boots on the ground. So what did we accomplish? And what is that, folks? Let's explain where the error there was. We went into Afghanistan to get al-Qaeda, and in the process involved ourselves in a war with the Taliban. And Americans don't know who the Taliban is. The Taliban is we act like it's some glorified terrorist group, and they certainly are fundamentalists, and they believe women should be in burqas and all these kinds of things, and, seen in public showing your legs, and we're going to beat you with iron rods and all these things. I mean, it's awful, awful people by Western standards. But this isn't the West, folks, and I'm not sure we can impose our values on these people, especially if they don't want them. And it's hard to know what they want, because the people that fight the Taliban, the people that used to be part of what's called the Northern Alliance, aren't all that good either, right? The Taliban are, for the most part, a group of ethnic tribes, and the Northern Alliance is groups of other ethnic tribes. When we decided that because the Taliban didn't immediately hang Osama bin Laden or hand him over to us, that they were part of the problem, we essentially declared war against millions and millions and millions of ethnic peoples in various tribes in that region. It's no wonder we didn't win. Those people, as soon as we leave the region, are going to pick up where they left off, which is going to be driving on Kabul. Now, understand something. The policy in Afghanistan is essentially an updated and glorified version of what we did in Vietnam when we pulled out of South Vietnam. That program was named by the Nixon administration Vietnamization, the training of local forces so that they could defend the region themselves. I think everyone who's been there knows very well how that's working out. As a matter of fact, many of our soldiers don't want to train and be alongside the Afghan soldiers because some of them are not on our side, and on multiple occasions they've killed our troops. But again, I'm not blaming the Afghans for this. This is the nature of the conflict there. Welcome to the guerrilla war, right? We shouldn't have done this to begin with. We're pulling out of there now. We're going to have some bases. We're going to use air power and forces like that to try to, aid the Afghan national forces on the ground. But we've seen this movie before, ladies and gentlemen, and it ended with U.S. helicopters, pulling off of the embassy with locals trying to hold on, to the struts and open doors of the helicopter. I mean, it's not going to end well. So when the president says these things, it's part of this idea that instead of re-examining whether we should have done this to begin with, which is what intelligent people and intelligent powers do, we're going to pretend like we did the right thing and now it's, peace with honor. When in reality, we should look at both those occasions and go, what can we learn from Iraq? And what can we learn from our experience in Afghanistan? And how can we avoid losing that kind of blood and treasure again? And this is not even to mention the damage that we've done to the locals in that region. That goes without saying, right? Could be 100,000 Iraqis dead. Which brings me to the next point that the president was making. And he was schizophrenic on this point. He deserves credit for making one half of it, and then he deserves criticism for not realizing that the second part of what he said is directly contradicted by the first part. The first part was where he talked about the damage that these airstrikes that we do in the region, the damage that American boots on the ground and the presence in the region has done in terms of fostering antagonism towards America and as a terrorist recruitment tool. The president was very smart when he talked about these things, when he said, listen, Al-Qaeda and similar forces, and he mentioned some of the Al-Qaeda splinter groups, use the drone strikes and the deaths of civilians and all this stuff as recruiting tools. Basically pointing out what, again, we all know. Chalmers Johnson did a bunch of good works before he died on this, but there's a lot of others where, it's common sense. If somebody killed your family, how upset would you be about it? There are times when you can put yourself in the other guy's shoes and see clearly what's going on. We kill a bad guy, because they're a bad guy, and we kill several other people when we kill the bad guy, and the families, friends, loved ones, and everything of the bad guys we killed and their friends are then mad at us forever after. If they become terrorists, it's like fighting the Hydra in ancient Greek mythology. Do you remember the Hydra? The Hydra was like a giant dragon with multiple heads. And the problem with the multiple heads were when you cut one off, multiple heads grew in its place. When you kill these terrorists, especially when you kill people who are not terrorists at the same time, you create more angry people who are willing to sometimes die to avenge those losses. It gets back to that whole idea about how the Middle Easterners tend to have long memories anyway, and yet it's the same way Americans would feel if somebody killed your relatives from another country. You'd be pretty mad, wouldn't you? Human nature. But then the president goes on to say, we're going to keep doing these things. Drone strikes are going to be done. We're just going to make sure they're more targeted. But this is where we get into where the president's not being really truthful. I mean, basically, he's talking about these drone strikes as though, he'll say things like, well, we're going to make sure that there's due process for, when we go after, especially Americans, but we're going to have, the same sorts of, what was the exact word, Ben? He said, we're going to have the same sorts of safeguards for foreign folks as we would for Americans. Sounds great in speeches, doesn't it, folks? And you'll throw around phrases like due process, because that's a constitutional phrase. That's a human right, as the American Constitution views it, right? It's not something that the Constitution gives you. It's something that it enunciates and enumerates, okay? You have a right to due process. What the administration has done, folks, that's sneaky, scary, and disingenuous, is they've changed what due process means. The president and his people have reclassified due process so that if he has a debate in the executive branch in secret with he and people who he appointed and who owe him for their jobs, that's the same as putting you in front of a jury or a judge, which, of course, is nonsense. But it allows the president then to say, we're giving everybody due process and we're sticking to the foundation of the constitutional framers and all that. But all he's done is change what the word means. That's like calling torture enhanced interrogation and saying, we don't torture people. Well, do you enhanced interrogate them? Oh, yeah, but that's not torture. It's the same thing that we talk about when we say today, we don't torture people anymore. And you'll hear the Obama administration say, we don't torture people. No, but we send them to countries who torture them for us and then phone us on the telephone and tell us what they said. Now, you tell me, is that something that allows you to look in the mirror and say that we are living up to the standards set by the myth of America because we didn't do the actual shocking of their genitals with the car battery? Someone else did? Is that enough plausible deniability to shake your responsibility for it as a taxpayer?